Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature, photographing our closest relatives, presented by Dr. Court Whelan. Court has been guiding for Nat Hab since 2013 and is also our Director of Sustainability and Conservation Travel. Today he's joining us from his home in Boulder, Colorado. Thanks for joining us, Court. I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Kendall, and welcome everyone. Greetings from a very warm Boulder today. I feel like I'm always talking about the weather as the first few words of these presentations. It's like getting to the 90s. It's like summer is here. You'll notice that the title is a little bit different. The vibe is the same, of course, but lessons in primate photography. I know that we advertise it as photographing your closest relatives, so I wanted to quickly talk about that. In lighting. So Clark, of all people, knows lighting. No, kidding, of course. The closest relatives are going to be our primates, our apes, our monkeys, our New World monkeys, our Old World monkeys, all those sort of things. We've talked about a lot of region-specific photography so far. This is going to be, region-specific, but again, encompassing most of the entire world. Because anytime you go into the tropics or subtropics, you stand to encounter and find some primates. So again, we're talking about things like orangutans and gorillas and lemurs of Madagascar and monkeys that you might find in Costa Rica or Asia. Lots to cover today. And the reason that this is quite distinct is that there are some very, very special considerations to make when photographing primates. Some things that might be obvious, some things that are less obvious. So we're going to get everything on the table here today. We're going to talk about my favorite ways to photograph primates. We're going to talk about the gear you need, whether you're going to Uganda or Rwanda or Madagascar, or even places like Costa Rica, Borneo. What is a go-to gear to photograph primates? Because again, there are special considerations. They are bigger than your average bird. Therefore, do you need as much telephoto capability as a more general wildlife safari? All those questions, of course, answered today. And then we're going to go into some of the challenges. What are the things that may throw you for a loop and be a little bit more difficult with regards to photographing these great apes and other primates? So yeah, lots to cover today. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Simply put, photographing primates, especially the big ones, it's the holy grail. I mean, nothing gets better than photographing orangutans in Borneo or gorillas in Uganda, Rwanda. I mean, this is like everything that a nature and wildlife photographer has dreamt of. Not only are your subjects big, they are also extremely photogenic. They are very human-like. Again, they're our closest cousins. There's a lot to love about photographing these guys. And then also, you can get really close to a lot of primates. So when we're thinking of kind of the three main groups I'm going to be talking about today, orangutans, gorillas, and then lemurs, they are just everything that you want to photograph. Lemurs, you can get so close you can use a wide angle to photograph these guys because they have a natural curiosity. They actually come into you. They have no fear of humans. So as a photographer, it's a dream because you can use less telephoto. That not only means that you don't have to bring as much or carry as much, but it also means that you can get some like super power lenses, where like your 70-200 millimeters get down to like f2.8 and all these really exciting things that give you better capabilities because you don't have to have the big bazookas all the time. But then all being said, although there are some major groups of primates that we think of first, like gorillas, like even chimpanzees, there are monkeys pretty much everywhere in the world. So this primate stuff carries, it covers the gamut of all tropics and subtropics of the world. There are so many more monkey species actually when you consider them versus great apes or even lemurs. So we're going to really try to cover it all centered around the big stuff, but knowing that there's a lot of stuff to photograph anytime you're in these highly photogenic tropics areas of the world. Okay, so we're going to talk about gear like I always start these conversations with. I'm going to go into some specifics, but probably not quite as much as I usually go into. Sometimes I go into very, very much detail about like the power considerations, electricity at certain safari camps. Because primates and monkeys and apes and all that around the world, there's so many different scenarios. I'm going to kind of take a little bit more of a bird's eye view. And I'm going to switch it up into how I talk about some of these things because I think it'll help kind of round out some of my other photography lesson presentations that I've done over the last few weeks. So this slide here, point and shoots versus DSLRs or mirrorless cameras. I often go into like a lot of specifics and this exact make and model of camera. You can check out other presentations for that. But I wanted to again bring it up a level and kind of give a bird's eye view of what it is to be Or what does it mean to have a point and shoot versus a DSLR? You know, what are the advantages and disadvantages? Why you might want to consider bringing, like, let's say you shoot with a big fancy camera and you might want to consider bringing a point and shoot, or vice versa. You have a point and shoot camera and you're like, okay, I'm going on the photo safari of a lifetime. I want to get the best shots possible. Should I upgrade? What are the pros and cons? So real quickly, obviously point and shoots are going to be more basic. They're going to be more introductory. DSLRs and mirrorless cameras, i.e. all those that need to change lenses. You know, anything that changes a lens is going to be that upper quality. A lot of people think, oh, well, they're just more megapixels and that's it. And it's just a better photo. And that's the only thing. Like, I've been happy with my photos. My great photos are still great. And I think that's really the point here, is that's entirely true. Your great photos on a point and shoot camera are going to be just as great as your great photos on a DSLR or a mirrorless. You might have some more megapixels, but for most of the photography we all share today on the internet, you know, on social media, you know, printing off on 8x10s or even 11x14s, 16x20s, canvas prints, you know, those kind of things, photo albums, the megapixels are not that big of a deal. What it really boils down to is when you get into those challenging photographic scenarios, the better camera is gonna be able to handle them better, simply put. You spend more money in your camera and you're gonna be able to make lemonade out of lemons a lot easier and a lot better. So if you're on the fence of like, should I upgrade, should I do it, you know, rewind back to those challenging photographic times. Like, let's say you were on a Costa Rica trip and you're around a bunch of people and they all have big fancy cameras with lenses and they were all getting these shots of, you know, really, really dark conditions of things really, really far away. And you're like, I really want to get those shots. Why don't my photos look like that? Even though I have the same zoom, I have a similar camera, it's got the same settings, I can set manual and aperture, you know, I can set my ISO. The thing is that the technology, the stuff that none of us see, like the real underbelly of the camera, the stuff that's inside the gut, so to speak, that's where the difference is. You will never see the sensor. You will never see the computer. You will never see the processing chip, but those things are better, straightforward. So I do shoot with a DSLR. I shoot with this one right here, the Canon 5D Mark IV, the 4th version, but you can get great photos with anything out there. Okay, but that's just, I figured I haven't talked about the real nuts and bolts of point and shoots versus DSLRs in a while, so there you go. Now on the opposite end of the spectrum, the great thing about point and shoots is that you don't have to change lenses. That's a huge advantage. You know, frankly, I was very reticent many, many moons ago to get into the DSLR world because I didn't want to have to change lenses. I didn't want the expense, but more than anything, I didn't want to miss a shot. And there is truth that when you have one lens that can do everything, you're going to get more photos. You really are. You're going to see a really cool flower 1 second, photograph that, and then you know, a gorilla comes swinging down from the treetops the next second, and you don't have to do anything to get that next shot. So there's an advantage in that. I do know a lot of pro and amateur photographers that might even have both cameras just for those instances. It gives you maximum flexibility. But at the end of the day, DSLRs will give you more flexibility, more possibility, again, to make that lemonade out of lemons in difficult scenarios. So, okay, we'll come back to those difficult scenarios in a little bit, and I'll probably kind of rewind a little bit as to where a DSLR might be better in certain instances. But let's talk about those of you with interchangeable lenses out there. I know there are a lot of you on the line right now that probably don't have these, so I won't make this the rest of the presentation, of course, but a lot of people like, you know, they have these questions. So this is my go-to kit for pretty much any wildlife safari. This is my go-to kit. I don't go anywhere without these things. Camera body, general wide angle lens, and then some sort of telephoto zoom lens. And these are what we call full frame equivalents. So if you have a more intro level camera body that might have what we call crop factor, you just multiply it. Like, let's say you have a Canon Rebel and you have a 300mm lens. You take that crop factor, which for that make and model is 1.6. You can Google all this to get the exact number, and that gives you this full frame equivalent. So I think for guerrilla photography, this would be just fine. You could get away with this. You could get away with almost any wildlife safari in the world and do great. But what are the special considerations for guerrilla photography, orangutan photography, general primate photography? Well, I like to bring my 16-35 to get big landscape shots and big perspective shots, travel shots. I always love to bring my 50mm lens because it gives you really, really cool shallow depth of field. Neither of those are really particularly good at photographing primates though. The big one, and this is what, like, this is the trophy piece. This is what's so cool about photographing most primates in the world, is that if you are a photographer and you know what a 70 to 200 millimeter lens is, and if you have one, that's going to be a really, really good lens for you. There are very few places in the world where your 70 to 200 gets as much use as primate photography. Maybe Galapagos Islands would be another similar one. And why that is because you can get within 200 millimeters, and this lens has some of the best optics, no matter what make and model out there, you know, whether it's Sony or Canon, Nikon, Panasonic, Fuji. This range, there's something about the optical physics of the 70 to 200 millimeter lens that gives you the best images, but also most of the time you have the ability to shoot f2.8, which gives you that really nice shallow depth of field. We're going to talk more about that in a second. But if you're like me, you know that if there's a place in the world I can use my 70 to 200, I'm going to bring it and I'm going to use it as much as I possibly can. Okay, so very, very good lens. 200 millimeters is not necessarily enough for everything. There will always be shots that you want to get. So I do recommend bringing a bit more or plan to crop after the fact. But the point is that I'd probably have a 70 to 200 millimeter on my camera maybe about half the time, 50%. Maybe a landscape lens on for 30%, and then maybe my 100 to 400 on for 20%. So you can kind of see that breakdown. This is a workhorse right here. Really, really great lens to have for all primate photography, especially the big ones, especially the great apes, gorillas, orangutans, and then also lemurs as well. Okay, so I always go over this slide, special technical considerations. Do I need to bring a tripod, a camera beanbag, a monopod, GorillaPod? Fortunately, I'm gonna do this. You don't really need to think about this stuff for primate photography. It's probably a welcome relief to most of you. Now, this is with a huge caveat, is that I am just not a big fan of tripods. I try to go handheld whenever humanly possible. I think that tripods are cumbersome, they're extra weight. I could bring a different lens. If I'm under weight restrictions, I can bring a different lens. I can bring 2 zoom lenses. I can bring more books. I can bring a computer if I wish to back up, that sort of stuff. So I don't do it. But more importantly, I think if you're going to try to photograph primates with being hindered and hampered by your camera attached to some sort of device, you're going to miss shots. Plain and simple, you're going to miss shots. You're not going to be able to pivot fast enough. I mean, if you've been to Madagascar with me or any of my other guides in natural habitat or in any way, you know that when these things come bounding down the trail, the last thing you want to do is have to fold up your tripod legs or unlock and swivel around. They move so fast that you're going to miss shots that are maybe the shot of the trip. So it's not that I insist you not bring these, but if you don't normally bring these, I don't really recommend relying on them. Okay, cool. So that was the gear. Now, before I want to go into my favorite shots. This is kind of like building your photo album, your trip photo album, building your portfolio. What are the things you want to look out for? Now, again, these are not rules necessarily. This is not like what I talked about in my Nature Photography 101 or 102 with, you know, rule of thirds and that sort of stuff, but just kind of like inspirational shots, what to look out for. And you'll also notice that in each of the ensuing, I don't know, 7 or 8 shots or so, you're going to see, for those interested, I put at the very top of the screen my shot setting, my camera settings. I've found that when I was really getting into photography starting, 10, 15 years ago, I just started looking in photo magazines and online, and I would see so many of these shot settings that I wasn't really paying attention, but kind of like subconsciously, I started to notice, oh, okay, so like for that kind of stuff, those are the normal settings. And then you start to realize what weird settings are, and why you have to divert from the normal. So again, don't read into it if you don't want to, but it's kind of fun just and beneficial just to sort of burn that into your brain, so to speak, and just latently memorize these settings as you go forward in your own photography, wildlife photography. Okay, so the first shot that I love is the classic edge-to-edge shot. And this goes for all wildlife photography, but particularly primates. What I mean by edge-to-edge, I often will tell my photo groups, fill the frame. Fill the frame with that ape, fill the frame with that elephant, whatever. What that means is you're basically filling your camera frame when you're looking through the viewfinder, whether it's optical or digital, you are filling the frame with your subject. So I might say fill the frame with that gorilla's face, fill the frame with that orangutan's face. And what that means is zoom in or move closer if you can safely, of course, and fill the frame with the colors and textures of that face. So I love this shot, edge to edge. It's what I also call a big photo. This does really, really well for things like travel magazines. It does really, really well for sharing on social media and sharing with friends and family because it's a big photo. It's an impressive photo. It does really well with looking in the back of your camera, because even that small screen, you say, holy cow, look at the crispness of its eyes, look at the color and texture of its fur. This is great. So big photo, classic edge-to-edge shot. This is something that you definitely want to look out for. And what I love so much about, again, primate photography, especially the big ones, the great apes, is that you can do so with normal telephotos. You don't have to have these big, long birding lenses like the 500, 600 millimeters. You can get these shots in a lot of cases with 70 to 200 millimeters, and definitely with 100 to 400 millimeters. It's such a luxury. So this is a shot you got to get. Another shot is the mid-action pose, okay? And what I mean by this is a lot of times with your primates, especially the great apes, they'll move around and then they'll stop. They'll move around and they'll stop. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of balancing my settings here to, anticipate for a little bit of movement here and there, but I'm really just waiting for that mid-action pose. Because these creatures are so human-like, remember they're our closest relatives, you can get so much personality, and you can you actually, even if you're not a naturalist, even if you are not a guide or don't often take nature trips, you can often anticipate action from primates really, really well because you are a primate. And as you get to the more intelligent primates like the great apes, orangutans and whatnot, you kind of know what they're gonna do because they behave a lot like us. So getting that mid-action pose is really, really nice, and waiting for that, that primate to look back at you. It's a posed shot, it's a portrait shot, great stuff. As you'll notice, my top settings, very high ISO. We're going to talk about that in the last part of the presentation, shooting in low light. Notice a moderately shallow depth of field with that f-stop because I want to blur that background. That creates that beautiful portrait effect. Again, we'll talk about these things more. The framed shot. Okay, so a lot of times in wildlife photography, this is particularly true with more of like the lesser primates, the monkeys and the lemurs and the langurs and all that. They're often in trees, and they're often up in trees, and they might be very close to you, but they might be obscured with so much jungle, so much foliage that you have to move around. You have to move your body to get a clearer view. And again, I make lemonade out of these shots, turning lemons into lemonade by looking for the foliage to create a natural frame around the animal. You may not get that perfectly clear shot ever with this one species that you see. We might see 25 different species in Madagascar, but for this one species of Pacifica, maybe this is your best shot. So use the foliage to your advantage. Use that shallow depth of field to kind of create a natural frame, and I think it's a beautiful looking photo, and it also tells a story. If you've watched any of my other webinars, storytelling is such an important part of photography. It tells a story that you're not in a zoo. You are truly out there. You are in vegetation. You are discovering. You are searching. You are hidden in the bushes. This kind of photo tells a lot. So the frame shot is something I always look out for. And it doesn't need to be composed exactly like this. Sometimes the foliage may be a little bit more focused, that's fine. But using natural vegetation to create a natural frame around the animal. To capture that texture shot, again, because it's such a luxury to get close to big primates. When we're in Borneo, I can guarantee you I'm going to get you close to some orangutans. When we're in Uganda and Rwanda together, I can guarantee you I'm going to get you close to some great apes, some mountain gorillas. You can get really, really close shots. I mean, it's gonna be tempting to get the shots of the silverback gorilla playing with its offspring. Get that shot too, but you can get so close. And we're gonna come back to this kind of photo of how to get this shot. Notice something interesting in the top right-hand corner of those settings. F8 is a pretty big depth of field, and there's a very specific reason why. So stay tuned in a few slides as to why you need to actually have a wide depth of field for this shot. But getting that, capture that texture, the wrinkles in the face, the expression in the eyebrows, the coarseness of the hair, the fingernails, what it's eating, just capture that texture, because it's an amazing thing to do for such a big animal. We do not have that luxury to do for a lot of big animals of the world, especially without a big telephoto lens. A lot of primate photography is sitting and waiting for that moment. So this is waiting for a moment shot. We have pig-tailed macaques. This is actually in Borneo. This is one of the, again, lesser primates, no offense to these monkeys here, but they're the smaller guys. They usually live in trees. They are not as evolved as the greater apes, certainly, but nevertheless, they are super charismatic. You're gonna probably see a lot more of them. And so, yeah, a shot of one of these guys just walking on a boardwalk or walking on the forest floor isn't gonna be rivetly exciting. rivetly, I'm not sure if that's a word, rivetingly exciting. But they often have offspring with them. They're more gregarious, so they often are in bigger groups, dozens at times. And so you can wait for a shot like this, and it's a lot about, what camera settings, what angle are you going to take, where are you going to be? I might see this little macaque and the mama there just kind of playing around. Where am I going to position myself to wait for that baby to pop out? I'm not going to be shooting every 10 seconds. I'm not going to waste my camera's memory. I'm not going to have it buffering and not be ready for that shot. But you better believe I'm going to wait for that one single moment. The backlit shot. So we're going to talk in a few more slides about how to compensate for too backlit of conditions. But sometimes backlighting is actually really, really nice. And this is often when you have backlit foliage, when you're not shooting up towards the sky, but shooting on a level plane. Proboscis monkeys of Borneo, a great, great way to photograph this. What I particularly like when there's just a soft backlighting, and for those that are not familiar with the term, backlighting just basically means that the light is coming from behind you. I have some backlighting from my kitchen window. I have front lighting from the window in front of me, so nice front lighting on me so you can see me. There's not a lot of front lighting in this guy, it's mostly just backlighting. What you can do is you can end up overexposing a shot to create kind of this nice soft white, almost like a studio lighting. So I actually quite like backlighting, especially with primates. Again, we're trying to humanize them in some cases. We're trying to personify them, show their grandeur, show that these are big animals that are closely related to us. So giving that nice kind of haloed effect of backlighting is something really, really nice. Again, we're going to talk more about backlighting in a few slides. The whoa, have you ever looked at your hand shot? Like the weird shots, like the weird behaviors, monkeys and apes and chimpanzees and lemurs. Again, they're funny, they're funky, they're weird, they're gonna do interesting things. So much of primate photography is waiting and being ready for that right moment. They're not always just posing and looking at you, they're animated. They might be picking ticks and lice off the one in front of it and eating it. So capturing that moment. So I love, this is such a symbol for so many shots that you want of primates. You want the animation, you want the behavior, whether it's notably human or notably not human. These are the kind of shots that you want. Another one, this is particularly true of primates, is what we call catchlight. So catchlight is that nice glimmer of light you see here, right here in the eyes, that really, it's that sparkle in the eye. Really what it is just the reflection of the sky, or it's a reflection of the sun, or it's a reflection of some lighting in some different way or angle. But we actually really, really like that in primate photography, not least of which in human primate photography. So you'll often notice that model photography sometimes have a little bit of catchlight. Sometimes people that are really adept at Photoshop might even Photoshop that little twinkle of eye in with human photographs, just like a little bit of white spot there. I certainly don't do that. You don't need to do that out in nature because there's a big light source here in the sky. But looking for that, what you look for generally is usually when the animal kind of lifts its head up a little bit. So a lot of times primates, they're rooting around and they're looking at their hands and they're doing funny stuff. But as soon as it tilts its head up, and especially if you have a nice open canopy, meaning like the trees are open around you, you can sit and wait and look for that catchlight shot. And even if it's the same shot you've shot 100 times, but if you start to notice that catchlight, it's gonna be a better shot. So the catchlight shot's something really great. And again, what that does is it shows and it speaks to humanize your subject. And I think that primates, especially mountain gorillas here, a great, great example of that. A scene that I absolutely love, that I always insist on, I think we can get very, very carried away with these big shots, the wildlife in landscape shot. And what that means is you take a landscape shot that would otherwise be kind of interesting. This one, if you took away the orangutan, it really wouldn't be, but looking for something that's a decent landscape shot and then getting the wildlife in it as well. In this case, the primate, the orangutan in Borneo. Here we are in Danam Valley. But really what this shot is just not being too greedy and not being too excessive on my close-up shots. Close-up shots are great, but there's something really nice about having this wildlife, this animal in landscape, is that it tells the story. And most importantly, it shows you we are in the honest to goodness wild. This is not a photo in the Kansas Zoo. Like, this is in the middle of the jungle. So even though, you're not getting the textures and the coloration and the lighting and the personality and the behavior and all that I talk about in some of these other shots, zooming out from time to time is really, really good. And this is why I love forcing myself to use a 70 to 200 millimeter lens, is that 70 millimeters, especially on a full frame camera, will get you a shot like this. And what that allows you to do is just force yourself. We're so consumed often with taking a shot and looking in the back of the camera and saying, oh, is that good? Oh, is that good? And we're looking to judge a photo and whether it's good or not based on a 1 square inch LCD screen. When it gets on the computer, it's a whole different thing. Okay, so wildlife in landscape shots. Okay, so we're going to talk about some of the challenges and some of the key techniques here. Okay, how to deal with backlighting. I think this is probably one of the most troublesome things, and maybe one of the most helpful, I hope one of the most helpful things you can hear from a presentation like this. Oftentimes with primates, we are aiming up in trees, we are photographing in trees, and what happens is if there's not nice forest cover behind them, like maybe they're in the tops of the trees or they're just in a gap of the trees, if it's mostly sky behind them, it's going to be blown out or washed out. It's going to be black backlit. Now, sometimes you can get these great situations where the sun's behind you and you get this nice coloration, and that helps a lot. But there's very, very little light shining actually on these monkeys here, on these macaques. You get this very, very gray, washed out background. So what do you do about that? Well, it's a pretty simple technique, and it's not necessarily all these things at once. It's about choosing some of these, and these really are, in my opinion, my order of events. Okay, so the first thing you do is if you're presented with one of these situations, the same thing goes with lemurs. I could show you hundreds of backlit lemur shots that I've taken over the years, is you minimize the backlight by zooming, okay, by using a telephoto, by bringing in a little bit. And this is where I think that 100 to 400, or even there's some new lenses out there that are 200 to 500, really, really help a lot, is that, you can make lemonade a bit easier. And same thing with the whole DSLR aspect, if you have that ability. So zooming in, really framing your shot to minimize the amount of sky you're seeing. Reposition yourself. I usually do these two things in concert. Usually repositioning yourself is not a luxury that we have. Sometimes, I'm on a boat here in the Kennebetangan River, and there's no way I can say, hey, can you reposition perfectly so I'm like 2 inches to the left, but with lemur photography in Madagascar, you're on foot pretty much the whole time, and you can easily move to the left or right. If you swivel yourself to the right, can you get it so there's a big tree in the background that darkens that background? Again, you're not trying to magically find light shining on the animal, you're just trying to create even lighting so the animal is as dark as the background, or the background is as dark as the animal. That allows you to make everything evenly exposed. That's what we're trying to find. You can underexpose your shot. And so what I mean by that is actually going into your exposure meter and saying, I want to darken this photo as I'm taking it. Usually that means that the aperture becomes higher, or a faster shutter speed, it lets less light in. And the reason for this is that what you don't want to do is truly blow out your background. You don't want to have too bright of a background, because it's not easy to rescue after the fact. This is an adage. It's much easier to lighten a dark photo than to darken a light photo, simply put. So maybe it's not going to look good in the back of your camera at that moment, but if you artificially darken the photo to get that background sky a little bit dialed back, you can lighten your photo in Lightroom, Photoshop, any of the programs, easier than you can dial that background down. So if you're going to err on the side of underexposing. Test your shots and correct. Your first shot that you take is going to be your test shot. Maybe take another shot with corrected settings, and probably a third and fourth, maybe even fifth shot. The more challenging it goes, the more test shots and experimentation. Last resort, you can do spot exposure or spot metering. If you don't know what that means, don't worry about it and don't do it. I don't really like it. I think it's just as inaccurate. I prefer taking a test shot and underexposing and just testing and testing and testing and changing my settings. Depth of field considerations, another really big one, particularly with primates, because of how close you can get, how much you can fill the frame with primates. Remember, we're talking about that, those big photos. So normally what you do with wildlife photography, at least my recommendation, is to have a shallow depth of field. What you want to do is there's often so much foliage. You want to isolate the animal in focus. That way the background just kind of melts away. It's a nice blur. So what happens is when you get really close to animals, whether it's because you have a big lens and you're filling the frame in camera, whether it's because physically they are approaching you, lemurs often approach you. They have no natural fear and no predators. So they're very curious. You can get startling, like I shot this in camera. There's no cropping in this photo. And the issue is that when it comes to aperture and depth of field, what is in focus and what's not is very much directly in relationship to how much of that is in screen. It's a confusing thing. Let me kind of reword that. So if you're, even though you think like a wide depth of field might be f5.6 for a lemur shot, the more that lemur's face is in your photo, the more individual components of that lemur becomes like your otherwise lemur in the distance. So you actually want to have a supremely wide depth of field for close-up shots, because you want the eyes in focus first and foremost. You probably want to get some of the nose in focus. You want to get the water droplets in focus, and you don't want to only have like part of the eye in focus, but that eye takes up a big part of your frame. So a shallow depth of field might work if an animal's far away and it's only like, say, proportionally, a quarter of your frame. But if the whole animal is like all of your frame, you've got to have a really, really wide depth of field, which means in this case, a pretty high F number. Okay, so we're doing F9. It's kind of dim. F9 doesn't let in a lot of light. 1/100, that's a slow shutter speed. ISO at 5,000, that's tough, but you have to have F9 because still, even look, I mean, if you look at this photo, yes, the eyes are in focus, my main prerogative, but the nose is still out of focus, even with F9. The fur is this is just behind its ears. It's very much out of focus. So it has everything to do with the proportion of that animal in your frame. If you're gonna fill the frame with it, you better have a high F number, and that does take special considerations with light. And this is where the big fancy cameras really, really excel. As if the shot was with ISO 5000, one of the biggest things your money goes to when buying fancy cameras is what we call low light sensitivity, or the ability to get to those high ISOs to allow for the big depth of field. So what happens when you just don't have enough light, or you really do need to isolate the subject? You want a shallower depth of field. Okay, so here we are. This is my final shot, I should advise you. The thing is like I was talking about with the previous shot, it's all about the proportion in your frame. So if I were to take this shot in camera, I would need a higher F number. But this is actually the shot that I took. Okay, remember, it's a smaller part of the frame, so I don't need quite as wide of a depth of field. Now, I had to shoot on a fast shutter speed because these guys are moving around all the time. But the beauty, again, of using less telephoto or less zoom is that you can use less of your frame, and then with a quality lens, you can actually crop in after the fact. Quality lens and quality camera. And you can crop in after the fact, and it preserves that depth of field because the shot that you took originally is actually farther away, and it's a smaller part of your frame, so you can get away with a smaller F number, okay? Another big rule, focus on the eyes. I've said this a few times, but it's such an important part. You can't not have the eyes in focus unless you're trying to do something really, really interesting and creative. All rules are meant to be broken, but focusing on the eyes is one of the most important things. Now, when you're getting close to primates, like you will with lemurs in Madagascar, if you have your camera set on auto focus or like autofocus point, it's going to be problematic for getting the eyes in focus, because remember what I said, if I focused on this lemur's hand, its face would be completely blurry. But the camera usually has all these different autofocus points. So this is like what we're seeing in my frame. If I have the camera choosing its autofocus points for me, whether it's going to choose that little square to focus on the eyes or not totally depends on the quality of the camera. And fortunately, newer cameras, better cameras these days are getting really good at figuring out eyes of animals. And a lot of the brand new mirrorless cameras even have like eye focus settings, which is super cool. I think it's one of the biggest advancements in photography since the camera. I don't know, think of an example. But what you want to do, this is my technique. I don't have that eye focusing thing in my camera, is I always want to set my camera on center point autofocus. Okay, so I'm still using autofocus, but I'm only using this center point to choose, or to actually have that area be the autofocus point. So in other words, I'm not letting my camera choose, oh, maybe it'll autofocus here. Maybe it'll choose this. Maybe it'll choose the hand. Maybe it'll choose the fur. I'm only setting it on this area. That way, what I'll do is I'll hold my shutter halfway. I'll aim that little box right on the eye. So I'll actually have moved my camera from this example frame. I'll hold my shutter halfway. That locks in the focus. And then I'll recompose the shot to get this nice kind of rule of thirds looking photo here. So that's a big thing. Focus on the eye, but don't let your camera try to do it unless you have a fancier, newer camera. Find in your camera's manual how to set center point autofocus. That's going to be a huge, huge leg up for you. Okay, so issues with camera fogging, another big challenge. I talked about this in my tropical photography presentation, so I'll probably be a little bit more brief here. But basically, when you are photographing primates, you're often in tropical areas of the world, jungles. Look at this photo. This is very, very humid. I think Borneo has an average humidity level of like 110%. I don't know if it could be over 100, but it feels like you're in a swimming pool. But it's totally worth it because the photography is incredible. As a result, though, when we're in our nice air-conditioned jungle lodge for the night, is our camera is cooling down. And what happens is when we go out the door that next morning without the proper steps I'm going to tell you here, your camera lens might turn into just a complete cloud. And it takes actually a long time to get it away. It's not just a matter of wiping it off with a lens cloth. It takes minutes, maybe even an hour for it to adjust based on how much you shock it. So the shock is the big thing. So let me give you a quick analogy here to kind of give you an idea of why it's fogging. So if you've ever been to the beach in a humid place, you're on a boat or you're sitting on the sand, maybe it's a lake, maybe it's a beach, like in Florida, it comes to mind, humid place, and you take a can of Coca-Cola out of the cooler, and it's a warm summer day, and instantly it condenses. The can turns into looking like this in just a matter of moments. What's happening is you're super cooling the can from the cooler, and you're introducing a very, very cold surface to a very warm environment. In that warm environment, you have gaseous water. What happens when you cool gaseous water? What happens when you cool a gas? Like think back to 10th grade, 11th grade chemistry. When you cool a gas, it turns into a liquid. So what happens is that little micro environment right around the can, because it's extremely cold, because the can's actually cooling that humid air, it turns gaseous water into liquid water. And this is fine for a can of Coke because it makes for great photography and it feels normal, but for photography and lenses, it's not good because that cold lens that you've been cooling off in your air-conditioned room all night now acts like the Coke can. It condenses water, i.e. fog, on the tip of your lens. So, this happens very pronounced in a pronounced way when you take, a can out of the cooler at 34 degrees Fahrenheit and you introduce it into 95-degree humid temperatures. Like that's, a big, big difference. But it still happens, maybe to a lesser degree. Maybe it won't form these water bubbles, but it forms fog if you take it from, say, like a 76-degree room to a 92-degree humid environment outside. Any fog is bad fog. So basically, here's what you do. You want to slow that shock down. You want to acclimate your camera slowly. The best way to do it, I found, is as I'm getting ready in the morning, is I just put my camera bag outside. Now, of course, you want to be safe. If there are monkeys around, or if you're at a city hotel or something, you're not going to do this. You want to be careful with your stuff. But most jungle lodges, you have a porch, it's raised, it's a veranda, or it's a total closed system, and there are people around. But basically, just let it warm up slowly for about 15 to 20 minutes. The more shock that you anticipate, the more I open my camera bag. I never try to let the camera just rawly come into contact with the humid environment. I try to just gradually open my camera bag. I might just open the top zipper of a backpack. I might prop it open with a book. Basically just gradually let it warm for 15 to 20 minutes. And I do not remove that lens cap until I'm absolutely needing to. So that might be another hour or two from then. I'm still walking around the jungle with it. But it's still acclimating, and I don't remove that lens cap because that's the main thing. Is if that lens cap slowly gets to the temperature of the environment, up to 92 degrees, you're not gonna have any fog. That's great. Gotta do it slow. Another great technique is as you're walking, from your jungle lodge to say breakfast in the morning, when you're at breakfast, just zip your bag open and put it next to your feet. A lot of these places have open air breakfast. So again, slowly doing it. Now, the most hardcore photographers out there in the world will just not turn the air conditioner on in their room. That's depending on the heat, that's quite a sacrifice, but that's the only fail-safe way to do it. But nevertheless, I think through these tips, 15 to 20 minutes, slow acclimation, you're great. Okay, so the last topic here before we get into a little bit of Q&A, photographing in low light. We kind of went over a lot of different settings here. You saw a lot of different examples. I'm just gonna kind of give you a basic statement here. There are so many makes and models in camera. There are so many different ways you can do this, but it all comes down to your ISO settings. ISO is very akin to film speed. Back in the day, you'd get like Kodak 400 or Kodak 800. Sometimes it's called ISO or ASA. Start to learn about these in your camera settings because there's a great new technology and a lot of cameras out there that lets you set ISO auto or auto ISO settings at a range. Okay, so this is your homework assignment. I could probably do a whole nother presentation on all the ins and outs of ISO. It's a fairly complex topic, but it's a great way to let more light into your camera sensor without actually getting a different lens, a different camera. It's all internal, it's all digital, it's all software related, mostly software related. So check that out on your downtime. It's gonna be a great resource. A great way to learn about it if you don't want to look in your camera's manual is I have a great website with natural habitat here for you, naturalphotographer.org. This is our own photo tutorial website. Many of you may know about it out there, but we do weekly posts. There's a lot of static content about ISO settings and aperture and composition, travel photography, macro photography. We do photo challenges, all sorts of great stuff. So bookmark that, check it out. And with that, I want to leave some time for questions. So let's go ahead and hear what you guys got.
Thanks, Court. We do have questions. I'd first like to remind everyone that you can submit your questions for Court via the questions field in your control panel. Okay, first question. Is a lens with image stabilization worth the extra cost?
Almost unequivocally, yes. Nowadays, there aren't many lenses that are coming without image stabilization, but you might be talking about the 70 to 200 millimeter lenses. Those are the ones that are still coming without IS. The reason, I'll just give you a quick backstory, is that it's the choice lens for a lot of fashion photography and model photography. In studios, you have all the lighting in the world, and so you just don't need image stabilization, because all image stabilization is it's when you have to shoot at slow shutter speeds, like under 1/100th of a second, and your hands move enough that it kind of shakes a little bit and blurs it. In a studio, they can really shoot as fast as they want because they're doing studio lighting. In nature, it's the exact opposite. I think image stabilization is one of the best inventions for nature and wildlife photography out there. So if you are talking about the 7200, it's like an extra $500, maybe more. It's really valuable. If you're going to spring for a quality lens, getting image stabilization is really valuable, and it adds to its resale value. You know, if you're going to sell that lens in a few years, most people want image stabilization. It's the small niche few that are in high-end fashion photography. So yeah, I would spring for it. Definitely worth it, because you're shooting in slow shutter speeds a lot with primates.
Great. We have a couple questions about shooting with your smartphone, and I know we had a webinar all about this recently, but do you have any quick tips or helpful hints that you can address right now?
I do. So let me talk about it as in relation to primate photography specifically. In general stuff, we spent a whole hour talking about this, so definitely check it out, because it gives you all the tips about composition and lighting and so on and so forth. That link below, just in the black, the travel resources webinars one. So actually, smartphones are fantastic for primate photography for very, very specific shots, and it's usually when you want to get your fellow travelers in shots as well. So a classic example is, there might be 4 or 6 of us in our small groups, kind of all observing and photographing a family of mountain gorillas, and they are so indifferent. They're curious. They're looking at us. The babies might come, and they might even come by you and tug your pant leg and run off, kind of giggling. They don't actually giggle, but you can tell in their mind they're giggling. And you want to get that scene. You want to be like, look how close they have approached us, and look at what an amazing environment this is. The cool thing about smartphones is, because their sensors are so small, normally small sensors are like not that great of thing for photography, but because their sensors are so small, the way they handle depth of field is quite different. So smartphones are really one of the few ways, it's the easiest way in today's day and age, you can photograph your group or a person with a primate that is not right next to them, because you're not, even lemurs, you're not going to get like this close to them. Gorillas, you're not going to. Most of them, you're not going to. But if they're, 5 or 10 feet or 20 feet behind you, the depth of field is such that you can actually get both things in focus with a smartphone. So it's actually a really, really useful tool. Even though you think, on our 3 or 4 hour gorilla trek, why bring a smartphone? It's just, maybe it'll rain, you don't want to carry it in your pocket. It's actually a really, really good tool to bring because of that depth of field thing. It's really fun. But yeah, check out that webinar on smartphone stuff with lighting and composition and all the tips and tricks I have, how you can add a polarizer to one just by putting your sunglasses on. Really cool stuff, so check it out.
Great. I think we've got one more question here. I would usually keep my ISO to under 1,000 in order to maximize color depth. Are you not concerned about that?
I'm always concerned about it. Yeah. I mean, high ISOs are not good. So I'll spend a minute talking about this. In photography, the lower the ISO, the better the photo. For color depth, for texture, for just general clarity. You'll look at a high ISO photo and the exact same photo at a low ISO, and you'll notice like, oh, the low ISO just looks better. I don't know why. It has to do with this thing we call grain or noise. It's like as if like sandpaper's kind of been rubbed over it. So a few ways to address this. Your better, bigger cameras are going to deal with high ISOs better. Now they're going to still take a better photo at a lower ISO, but your threshold, at an intro camera versus a higher pro level is going to be totally different. Like you can shoot at ISO 5000 and be like, oh yeah, that's like the shots that I'm used to getting. The other thing is that a lot of times the reason I'm shooting on high ISO is because there's no other way I can get the shot. So, and what that means is that you have to shoot at a fast enough shutter speed to either freeze motion of the animal or freeze motion of my hand. And, anything below 1/60th of a second with any sort of telephoto is really hard to stabilize. And, if an animal's moving, even just like slightly, it's going to blur. And so you're either going to have a blurred photo with a low ISO, great quality, but blurred and just kind of not what you wanted, or you're going to have it approaching a little bit too grainy, not quite the right color, just not as good of a photo, but you got the shot. Okay, so it's about lesser of two evils. I can tell you, you can't fix a blurred photo in Photoshop. You can fix a photo with too high ISO in Photoshop. There's noise reduction software, a bunch of other tricks. So yeah, I'm totally worried. But at the end of the day, it's like you either get the shot or you don't in these challenging environments. So remember, it's all about, this is challenging photography at times because of lighting. So that's where if you're going to spring for a better camera, you can definitely do so to get higher ISO. And then the last thing I'll mention there is that a big line in the sand when you're into more fancier cameras is whether you do have a crop frame camera or a full frame camera. If those words don't mean a lot to you, check out Natural Photographer. I do a whole post and a whole article on this. But basically, your full frame camera has a bigger sensor. Bigger sensors can deal with noise or high ISOs a lot better. When we talk about like iPhones and smartphones, they're actually doing really well with that, but it's all computer algorithms. They have hundreds of dollars going into that, probably in every camera for the best cameras, best phones. So yeah, if you're going to be photographing in jungles of the world, let's say you watch this webinar and you say, you know what, in the next 3 years, I'm going to go to Madagascar, Borneo, and Uganda. Well, great. I'd love to see you there. You might want to think about getting a full frame camera, and you're going to get the best photos possible. Cool.
Great. We do have one question that just came in that I want to address since we have some time.
Absolutely.
If you're shooting mountain gorillas, photographing them, and you want to just carry 2 lenses, what do you suggest?
Yeah, 24 to 105 and 100 to 400. Yep. You definitely want both. Let's start off by saying if you only had one lens, it'd be your 100 to 400. Actually, no, I'd say if I had one lens, it'd be the 70 to 200 because that gives you enough landscape stuff and it also gives you enough telephoto. But really, you want to be bringing at least 2, and if you have the ability to bring 3, like you have a 70 to 200, I would do that. 100 to 400, what you don't want to do is, on every trip, you're going to have basically 2 treks. This is a whole trip over to Uganda. Some trips we do 4 treks, but what you don't want is maybe, you get unlucky and gorillas are just a little bit further away than you expected. You don't want to be severely under-equipped with not enough telephoto. So really the ideal situation is a 24 to 105, a 100 to 400, and a 70 to 200. Your 70 to 200 is your big X factor, but you don't want to get caught without enough zoom because those full frame shots are just so spectacular. It's so funny. As I think about this more, there's arguments you could make for even just bringing a 70 to 200 and 100 to 400. There really are. But this is where, I think going with a photography photography company that knows how to handle this, they know to hire porters that can help with carrying some things. These folks' livelihoods do this every day, multiple times a day. So hiring, folks that'll help with that and getting in the right position, it makes a big difference. So the ideal thing is to bring 3 lenses, and that's what I would do. But if you can only bring 2, I guess you're going to twist my arm, and I'll do something with some good telephoto, 100 to 400, and then 24 to 105. But gosh, we could sit and have a beer and talk about this a lot longer. I would love to, because it's like, yeah, there are different arguments that you could bring some other combinations. I mean, you actually, so sorry, this will be my last point. Technically, what you could do, actually, this may be a better option, is you bring your smartphone and then the 70 to 200 and then a 100 to 400, because your smartphone is actually going to get better group travel shots and landscape shots, for the gorillas and the landscape, or as good. And then if you only had to bring 2, then you're 70 to 200, 100 to 400. That's what I would do. Final answer.
Okay, that's great, Court. Thank you. Well, great job. We had some fans today. Someone, Barbara McKinnon, wanted to let you know she really enjoyed your monarch butterfly book.
Oh, lovely. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yeah, lots more photos there. And yeah, you want to talk about a whole other thing. Couldn't be more different than photographing primates, at least in terms of the DNA. But yeah, monarch butterflies, another thing that I'm very passionate about.
Absolutely. All right, well, so that was the last question we've got time for today, so I'll hand it over to you for some closing comments.
Cool. Well, simply put, go photograph some primates. A great way to practice is photograph primates in your own home. They're very similar for a lot of these techniques. You can set up some mock shots and practice. No better time than now to practice some of these techniques. But really, I gotta say, it's so rewarding, it's so fun, it's so thrilling to get to some of these hot spots for primates, whether it's more of the lesser primates of Madagascar, lesser only in classification and taxonomy, but as of course some of the most charismatic to photograph. And when you get into big stuff like orangutans in Borneo and mountain gorillas and chimpanzees of Uganda and Rwanda, it's the holy grail, simply put. So let's hope to see you out there.
Yeah, and thanks for joining, everyone. And be sure to join us tomorrow for our next daily dose, Nature's Accomplices, How Ravens Help Other Predators Hunt, presented by Brad Josephs. We did record today's presentation and we'll get that replay out to you soon. So with that, I'll conclude the webinar. Thanks, Court. Goodbye, everybody.